Just to confirm, OC, we're due to proceed na, right?
Yes. Good, good, good. Thank you. Also, you're also getting recorded because you turn on your cam. Is that fine?
Yeah, okay lang. Okay, so in that case, debating on the motion, the relationship escalator stuff. Calling on PM to start the round. You're here.
Hi, Mejos mute. Um, Luca, first speaker. POIs through voice. I'll put it in the chat as well. I mean, I will take it through voice in chat. Don't put it in chat.
So confusing.
Just voice.
Ang tawag doon? Trigger warning. Yun. Depression and sad stuff. Trans people, teens, and women have killed themselves or have been killed because where they were not able to express themselves. We think in this generation, it is more important to be able to express your true and authentic self, and anything outside from that, we will not accept as a Gen Z person. Very proud to propose 3 pieces of contextualization to properly set up this debate. Number 1, what does the relationship escalator look like? 4 points of framing. Number 1, it comes from a religious and patriarchal society, which you do not live in as a Gen Z because this existed back in the 1980s or the 2000s, where this is not where you were born in. But number 2, this is a chronological and end goal based like progression. That means that you have to follow the step-by-step ways of doing these relationships, but also you have to follow the necessary end goal, which is to have a family. Deviating from this means that you're not following the relationship escalator. That means that you're making your parents sad. Thirdly, it looks like starting from dates, then doing physical stuff, then having sex, then having marriage, and then you have children. But fourthly, any skipped steps means that you're deviating from the process, and this is something that government supports. Number 2, what do you think the Gen Z is likely to look like? And this is 6 pieces of framing why we think of what exactly this person is likely to look like. Number 1, note that Generation Z is living in the poorest generation we have had. That is, we have significantly more money, but we have significantly less purchasing power. That means that these people are likely to be career driven because they want to have economic security for themselves, because their parents used to be able to buy a house for like 30,000 pesos, but now 30,000 pesos can't even secure you 1 month of rent. Number 2, the Overton window has already shifted from the previous generations, which means that we currently live as the Gen Z in a more progressive society where people are very expressive of their affiliations towards more progressive things and participate in activism, which is why you in UPD and us, you as a judge, you said that that's making team code, but also I think it's something that people are very expressive of. Thirdly, we don't live in the context of like religious and patriarchal societies anymore, or at the very least it's about to change, or we are about to reach the tipping point, particularly when these people do not particularly go to church anymore, but also like a lot of the time they spend on going to TikTok, going to social media. These are the things that they put themselves in. Fourthly, this is an age of technology. In media where a lot of people criticize things like social constructs, like marriage, there are so many perspectives, and we usually go to these bloggers, to these video essayists, to find meaning and to find answers towards questions that we ask. Fifthly, we are probably individualistic, primarily because the most of the narratives that this comes from is the Western world, which means that this is probably you focusing on yourself rather than an Asian perspective that focuses on giving back to your community. Sixthly, individuals are complex. They're ever changing, and at one point in time, they are not completely perfect or have information asymmetry. For all of those reasons, not proud to propose, but this is what a Gen Z look like. What do we support, therefore, in deviation? Deviation looks like 3 things. Number 1, you can either not opt into it entirely, but opt into some of it, which means that you can still follow the ladder, but at the end, not have a family. Number 2, you can reject it entirely, which means that you can probably be polyamorous, you can probably anti-natalist in these extents, and these are and probably dabble in some situationships. These are things that we support. But thirdly, this probably means that you're opting into the normalization of other types of relationships. Like, for example, prioritizing your career, so you just don't have a family or don't have a relationship at all. All this means that you're following the ladder, but at the end, you just partner that actually I don't want to have a child, I am anti-natalist. But thirdly, this also probably means that you're not okay with marriage because it's anti-woman, because child rearing is so harmful to feminists, for example. These are the types of things that we think this individual is likely to deviate in these extents. First argument, why do you think following it is inherently restrictive and harmful to this individual's mind? Note that this is an actor motion. We are outsiders merely looking in. In this debate, this means that the debate is happening in the mind of this Gen Zer. So, what is the problem? We think the problem is that Gen Z is the loneliest generation. We are the most depressed, the most disconnected, the most lost and anxious generation ever because of the uncertainty of the world. We think, therefore, that following the relationship escalator extenuates this under opposition bench for two reasons. Number one, it is too rigid. You have to believe under opposition bench first that they opt into religion and patriarchy, which, given the six things that I've proven to you already, means that the average person who is Gen Z is probably not going to look like this because they are liberal. They're not because they are liberal. They're not straight. They're not white. So opposition cannot say that this is likely. I.e., you do not live in a world where religion is a source of meaning. But number two, we think under their paradigm, cognitive dissonance is very likely because the goalposts that the relationship escalator set upon you is something that you have established, that your parents established on you, but your friends are doing something completely different, which means that you're likely to feel lost, anxious, depressed, because you don't know who to follow and you don't know what it means because you're seeing one thing from your friends, but you're seeing another with your family. How do we resolve this under governance side? At the very least, when we deviate from the relationship escalator, it opens us up to reflection. It opens us up to new goalposts. If I used to think that I should be at 30, I need to have a wife and I need to have a house and family. Now, when I reach 30 without having those things, perhaps I will not be so sorrowful when that happens because now I have set new goalposts upon myself to just have good friends by the time I'm 30. But secondly, we think that this is also economically beneficial under our side for the specific reason that the state of the world currently is inherently harmful. That means buying gifts for your loved one, buying a home is really difficult. Child rearing is so expensive and also tough for your mental capacity. We think that physically it's likely to take a toll on you. On the opposition side, if you follow the relationship escalator, if you deviate from this, you're significantly more likely to not experience this. Second argument, where do you find meaning? And this is also because this motion assesses the long-term planning and selection of this person. We think that this is the most free generation that we've had. So finding authenticity and choice outside of the norm is on a premium for this individual. There are two mechanisms for this. Number one, you don't look at the outcome under our paradigm. Deviating means finding meaning in the process of looking for yourself. That means that perhaps I'm not sure if I actually want to be polyamorous, but you find meaning in terms of discovering yourself to be polyamorous, for example, or whether antinatalism is actually for you. We think that looking for a process means that meaning making is significantly more proximate to you and is significantly more accessible compared to the metrics that opposition will provide. But number two, you are now significantly more willing to express yourself. You're less afraid to change yourself at the expense of other people's approval of yourself. So under their paradigm, you might be sad because your conformist partner might think that they will leave you because you change your minds about natalism. But under our paradigm, once you deviate from it, you normalize your capacity to be able to be okay with other people's disappointments. You are now significantly more courageous and less guilty for doing these actions for yourselves. The impact of this is simple. Staying and conforming is something that is harmful for your brain and long-term capacity to make meaning. Under governance side, you express the complexity of the mind. In the future, you might actually feel like yourself. Very proud to propose.
All right, thank you so much, PM, for that speech to open the clash coming from up calling on Elo. Here.
Wait, sorry. Can we check if we're audible? Because we were raising POIs consistently earlier, but the POI rule wasn't imposed.
Sorry.
You're audible now, but
Clarified.
Oh, it
sorry.
was heard earlier. Okay, it's okay. Thank you. Sorry.
We didn't hear anything. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, just need to finish something. All right, POIs through voice. If you have anything, obviously you can just raise it, and I'll find time to take you. Speech starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 things from my speech. Firstly, why the escalator is best fit for the Gen Z and their individual context. And secondly, why the benefits of relationships you gain on side government are transferable to all other kinds of relationships you can get on side opposition. 4 pieces of framing prior to entering my responses and argumentation. Firstly, very clearly, what does the world look like on opposition? It looks like when you opt into relationships explicitly through the escalator. So you go through the dating, the kissing, the sex, the marriage, and then you get kids, and then you grow old together. But alternatively as well, you can also not opt into any relationships at all. So you can be single and you can just rely on your friends and family and stuff like that. Because clarification, what does the Gen Z want? We agree with the government when they tell you that the Gen Z is the most career-oriented as fuck generation that we've ever had in the world. But also, like what they told you, we do agree that these individuals have also the lowest buying power we have seen in history, and they have been faced with multiple, like just generationally high levels of inflation. But lastly, understand that on-site government, you also need to go through many hoops to justify your relationships with the government and with the family that you are so intertwined with. I'll take your POI after all of this. But outside of relationships as well, we would suggest that you value relationships on their side and ours, but you don't prioritize them because of the demands of the other things outside of your life. So for instance, obviously, school and work can be extremely tedious. So you want your relationship to be as peaceful and as flexible as possible. So you want to be able to opt in or out of it, and you don't want to be oppressed by the people you love very much. But lastly, is that understand the control that people around you have. For instance, in conservative pockets of the Philippines, it is very common for individuals to not leave their family homes well into their 30s. So even when you are working, presumably your family has control over what car you drive, where you sleep at night, for instance, wherever you get your allowance, etc. But lastly, is in terms of the escalator, understand that these things are promoted by the older people and traditional parents, people who generally have strong levels of authority, but furthermore, it is promoted in things like popular media. So even as a kid, you were raised to know that this is the way in which people preferably want to attain relationships. Probably the vast majority of individuals want to opt into relationships in this way. But before I go on to my response, Cheryl, take a POI. Go.
So, Chair, you cannot believe that you can't opt into a relationship on opposition. On their side, they have to defend that everyone has to go into a relationship because this is the nuance of a relationship escalator. If you choose not to go into a relationship, that is deviating from the escalator.
Mezen, so it's either you are in a family or you are not. So when you deviate from the escalator, this is the process of attaining that relationship. So you can also just be single on your side, but we would suggest that, like, obviously you suggest a deviation in terms of the process of getting to that relationship. That is what's exclusive to yours. On our side, you can choose to have a family or choose to be single. That is the alternative on side opposition. Firstly, in terms of our responses to side of government. So the first argument they tell you is that obviously they've built a frame, right? So notice how they mention to you multiple reasons as to why you cannot opt into any sort of relationship. Because of things like of your career orientation, of you being controlled by your parents, and you not having the brain power to opt out of these things and to jump off these loopholes. The conclusion means that you probably do not have the capacity on their side to defend all of the decisions that you have. This is particularly important because they tell you that you are already so connected to your parents and your family and you have so little buying power. So this means that by their very own analysis, you cannot fight for your life defending something that your family rejects. So sure, even if we cannot defend a world wherein we are not single and you have to opt into relationships, I think by the point of weighing, I would rather that it's easier for you to just like opt into a relationship that you don't probably want, rather than like opt into a relationship that you do want out of the sake for true love, and your family just absolutely hates you, cuts you off, deprives you of money, deprives you of a house, deprives you of your school, stuff like that are very proximate to you. I'll build this into my second argument, Mesan. First argument, then, therefore, in terms of why you're able to, why the escalator is the best for the context of the Gen Z and their individual lives. So the steps in terms of how you're able to gain these relationships are very clear. But most crucially, this means that whatever relationship you are going to get on side opposition, in almost all instances, is likely to be supported by your parents, by your family. So understand that they're probably going to be extremely supportive of you when they see that one day you come home with a very handsome man or a very successful woman. Obviously, they're going to further want for you to be affiliated with this person. Your relationship with the people, with the person you're in a relationship with, and your family is likely to be even better than ever before. But this therefore means that when obviously on our side exclusively, you were able to do things like being able to balance for example, your finances outside of your finances, or for example, your work and things like, obviously like,
Right.
school, because you are and you were able to work with a peace of mind that you are not going to be kicked out of your house. We understand, Chair, that these are the most proximate benefits to you, that like just way more than whatever benefits come from opposition in terms of like abstract form of happiness. We would suggest that on the side, because obviously you were able to attain the proximate benefits of things like, financial stability, which are much more proximate and important to you when they themselves prove that you have very limited buying power already. So we say in the second argument, then, therefore, is that the benefits that you gain from government, even at their very best case, are transferable to different kinds of relationships you have on ours. So even if you have a relationship on our end and you are not truly happy with the partner that you have on our end, presumably you still have your family because they still love you and they haven't left you. You still have your friends who don't disown you because they're homophobes and they don't like the fact that you're like, that you're gay and stuff like that, right? So we would suggest that this engages very well with the second argument on terms of meaning, because the alternative on opposition is that you opt into these relationships or don't relationships into anything at all. So even at the worst case that you opt into relationships that you don't particularly like, we would suggest that because you have things like your friends and your family and your business partners, for example, and your debate friends who can give you things like safe spaces, you are able to have things like genuine support and genuine satisfaction over the deep conversations that you truly have, over, for example, the support that they provide to you in times when it's very tough for you. So we would suggest that this is very important because you don't need to fight your life to be able to keep for these things. And obviously, given the very difficult context that they paint to you, we would suggest it's the most proximate benefit and the most important benefit for you to uphold. For all of these reasons and more, vote up. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, LO. Just give me a few seconds.
Hello. Okay.
I
I just-
calling on BPM to deliver their speech.
Sorry. Sorry, I didn't know I was not called yet. Sorry.
It's fine.
I'll just get my timer. All right, POIs through voice. I think we'll just increase our volume just so that we can hear. But I'll also ask at the 5th minute in case.
Can you
what?
ask them to try speaking?
Can they try speaking?
Hello.
Okay, yeah, audible.
Thank you.
All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to read the dictionary definition of what diversion and deviation actually means. It is to stray. It is a digression, to turn aside and to diverge. That means that for a fair comparative debate, opposition has to take on the burden of the actual model being following this rigid outline of what the progression of a relationship looks like. Because ultimately, the soft line case that comes from the first speaker already concedes that because there are also certain benefits that come from being single or just not opting into this relationship, means that already this deviation is something that can likely benefit the Gen Z person. And I don't think that coming from the second speaker, they can necessarily clarify this given the tension in their case already, but I'm going to further weigh in as to why, even on the best case that they say that, oh, being single is something on their side, why they lose this debate. Because I think that I want to point out what exactly Haduka told you in this debate. The average Gen Z individual does not have the capacity to do this, and opposition concedes to this. We will say specifically why having you follow the relationship escalator exacerbates all of the harms of your incapacity to be able to opt in. But secondly, that even at the point at which they have the capacity to do so, they are not interested to do this because we characterize the most fair and average Gen Z person and what they're likely to look like. So given all of these things, they have to engage with all of the characterizations that Haduka has given you, because we've clearly told you why all of these interests are something that's aligned to why they will likely not want to be able to follow this relationship escalator and instead deviate. So 2 issues for you today, right? The first is this actually within the capacity of a Gen Z person, the average Gen Z actor that we are trying to debate as? And second, is this something that is within their interest in the first place? Firstly, on their capacity, I want to talk about the uncertainty argument that comes from Haduka, because we don't get any actual engagement or direct responses from the LO regarding this. I want to very emphasize this clearly. Life is unpredictable. So at the point at which the certainty of the actual benefits that you get coming from opposition of security, of protection, self-preservation relies and is contingent on the fact that you are able to, one, follow through all of these steps of the relationship escalator, and two, by the way, a relationship takes 2 to tango. That means that you have to find another person that is willing to do this and all of these steps with you. You do not get that guarantee under their side. Let me point out, this is very detrimental specifically to, for example, Gen Z women, because when they feel guilty about getting pregnant before marriage, that you have to choose between your career and if you want a family, that because a lot of Gen Z people believe as well that, oh, because they opt into this relationship escalator, you are in a biological timer. So at the point at which you can't even secure your apartment in the next month because we already told you that the establishment of this society right now is economically and drastically something that's anxious and brittle, that means that you can't even choose between you having a happy relationship and also just securing your financial stability in the long term. That means that you are likely to actually prioritize things, for example, like your economic interest or your just ability to survive. That means that because you cannot opt in or you do not have the capacity to do so, either one, the ability for you to opt in is severely minimized. So you get into bad relationships, you get into toxic boyfriends or girlfriends. You also just generally don't feel fulfilled at the point at which you are forcing yourself to balance these relationships to the point at which the timeline happens, but also want to keep your job or keep your career. These are things that they don't consider on their opposition side, and it's not responded to under their frame. That means that therefore, security is not a certain benefit that your family will approve and will necessarily love you because you follow these things. A lot of the mechanisms has to come from their first speaker, so you cannot necessarily adjust and build all of these things and backload under DLO. Second thing, cognitive dissonance. This was also nothing responded to by the actual first speaker, but it directly engaged with their frame. So let's talk about that. Because you have parents that will likely believe in other things, like for example, you wanting a conservative family or rather a traditional family versus your friends that opt into deviations because they are Gen Z. I want to respond to this in the same way that this directly engages with their second and first argument. I want to paint a picture of the average Gen Z person. Realistically, if you look at the internet, Tumblr, Twitter, any of those social medias, you will know that Gen Z has a collective parental trauma. Everyone hates their parents. Everyone is traumatized by the fact that their religious conservative parents force them into a church or going to mass or being monogamous, etc. But a lot of these people are also very much victimized by their own families. I don't understand the proximity of your family if they already reject you in the first place, if you're likely not to agree with their political beliefs or the fact that they are also enforcing these traditional values on you. It's unclear what is the exact proximity for you to be able to go under this narrative or under this type of frame at the point at which you are not likely to like your parents in the first place as an average Gen Z. But even if we assume the actual case of where, you're like to be Eastern and you're gonna go under the family anyway, even just LGBT people have these problems. So at the point at which your identity physically cannot opt into these types of things, you will rather force and prioritize your own self and individualistic desires at the point at which your internet, your friends and your other inclusive, like actual people that you care about are more likely to include you or actually protect you at the end of the day. Found families, friends are also safety nets for you to be able to protect yourself and self-preserve. Families are not exclusive, but sure, POI.
The existence of the escalator isn't the erasure of other strong narratives in Gen Z, like narratives that say you shouldn't have a kid if you're not ready. So you only get to discern when you see both sides with the escalator.
But you only get that type of like discernment and exploration when you deviate. Because at the point at which you are forced into one path, that means that you can only find out one specific outline or like trajectory of your life. That is something that you have to defend under your side. The second thing I want to talk about is fulfillment. Because where do you actually get it? We posit that this is the most important metric because it's the certain exclusive thing as an individual you would likely want to prioritize because you just want to have meaning in your life. We think that you only get this exclusively when you deviate at the point at which you allow yourself to explore. The rigidity of this outline and this progression means that you are looking at goalposts, you're looking at expectations. There is a bucket list and a checklist for you to feel like you have worth and value as a person. That is not something that we want because as a Gen Z person, whether you are on the spectrum of individualistic or you have empathy for the collective, you yourself will likely feel that you have principal obligation to how you feel throughout the process of your life because you're already like surrounded by negativity and you're nihilistic because you live in a world that's likely to die in the next 30 years because of climate change. You want to make the most out of your time. You will likely want to do these things and like look at relationships at a point of view where if you want to be able to opt in, you will do so out of your own fulfillment, out of your own autonomy, out of your own choice. You only get fulfillment, therefore, under our side that is exclusive and certain under government. So with all of these reasons, if you want to like actually side with one, a side that proves to you the incapacity of this Gen Z person to opt into it, but two, why is the likely interest in this context of a Gen Z person, you only get that coming from government. With all of these reasons, propose.
All right, thank you, DPM, for that speech. To continue the clash from up, calling on DLO to here.
Hello, am I both visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Okay. Hold on. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It came from the Prime Minister. They admit that Generation Z is probably the loneliest generation right now. That the average Gen Z individual still probably wants a relationship because that can satisfy their loneliness and get them the solace they have in human connection. So this concession coming from government is already dangerous to their case anyway because it admits that you probably still want a relationship in the first place. But then you have to consider that it's hard to do in government's world and pursue a relationship when everyone is non-committal. When people see you as someone pretty enough to fuck, but not enough to actively pursue. If that is the case then, and people are like settling for things like situationships, but you as a Gen Z want a like serious relationship because of the same problem of government of like you being lonely, I think you just necessarily get more better relationships inside opposition, and that's what I'll prove to you today in this debate. Before I proceed, a few responses. The first thing that came from government side is that it's controlled by the patriarchy and religious institutions. Firstly, that's true. But if Prime Minister says that these already exist years ago, then the pull of these institutions are probably weak already. So the order or the escalator may still exist right now, but the influence of these institutions are weak with the same logic said by Prime Minister. So we have enough reason to believe that the order escalator can be inclusive now because as they say, they're already years away from patriarchy and religious institutions. But secondly, even if they are strong and you still believe that the order escalator is still controlled by things like religious institutions and the patriarchy, oftentimes we say this is already a form of reclamation. In the same way that the feminist movement turned the concept of career men and turned it into the career woman you see now today. So if that is the case, then you as a Generation Z individual, you're able to reclaim the identity taken from you, and you do that through three things. One, you get to control the narrative. You actively take it away from the religious and patriarchal institutions that are probably weak already, and actually necessarily control the narrative for your own selves and use it to empower your own choices. But secondly, you're able to define that narrative for you. What is a good date? What is a good marriage? What are good children? You're able to necessarily personalize the way in which you want to cater into that relationship and what to expect from your future partners, but more than an extension. But thirdly, you're able to defend your needs of commitment. Oftentimes, a lot of Generation Z individuals right now are afraid of commitment because they can't admit the fact that they still long for human connection because they're super lonely. But oftentimes, they are deprived of this right to defend themselves because other people from Generation Z are already telling you to be individualistic, to fuck around, to mess around, to not be committal. That's already a problem that you're probably going through, and so you probably want to attack that. But the third thing under this is then it acts as a counter narrative, right? Realize that Generation Z already has their own echo chamber. The norm is already deviation, such as already a lot of people telling you to like not get married, pursue your career, but like that's fine. The problem is that oftentimes the prerequisite to anything Generation Z wants is the availability of choices. And oftentimes if you're in an echo chamber that tells you to be individualistic, then that's probably a fabricated choice in the first place because you don't open up yourself to the idea that, hey, even if I live in a generation where there are like people that are non-committal and only settle for situationship, maybe it's still possible for me to be in a good marriage, to have like good children, to raise a family, because these may be the things that I want right now, but I believe I cannot pursue because these are things that probably other Generation Z would shun me for. Extension then. But before I proceed, let's take a POI if there's any.
Sorry. Under your side, you're deviating from the spirit of the motion because it says that you have to follow this rigidly and you have to follow the instructions of your religious and patriarchal leaders. If you are saying that it's weaker now, then that is also a form of deviation. It's still unclear what opposition stance is.
No, the order and escalator still exist, but you said from your speech that the patriarchy and the religious institutions' influence of the escalator are probably still from years ago because we're past it already. So the escalator can exist and the influence are like two different things. What's the extension then? We say it's easier and it's like clearer to set boundaries in our side. And this is already engaging on why the step-by-step process is like super important. Fear warning, harassment, etc., etc. The problem right now is that without the escalator, people enter into relationship with varying expectations and varying demands within the relationship. This looks like men who kiss you in the first date, even if that's probably something you don't want, or cases of harassment because you justify that your love was super intense, so you can skip the first steps of getting to know you entirely because, hey, I went into this wanting this only and not necessarily following the steps that you may want to consider. These problems are amplified when you have no respect for these steps and everything becomes a free-for-all, especially inside government. How is this then solved by the escalator? Two steps. The first is on how you have a metric on how to assess the relationship. So how was the date? How was the sex? How was the marriage? How's your family? Assessments become more comprehensive because you evaluate the red flags in each step. So if he already disrespected you on the date, then you probably won't let him hold your hand in the next dates. If he's already screwing other women when you're already having a label, then you probably won't marry this person in the first place. What's good about this then is because it's a step-by-step process, you're able to make your own standard of what is the person you're looking for in each kind of scenario. What makes the perfect date? What makes the perfect sex? What makes the perfect marriage? Absent the escalator, you cannot even hold on to your own standard because you are confused as to what stage of the relationship you're already in. You may believe that maybe you're already intimate, but the other person may probably believe that you're still just dating and you're probably like not deserving of a label. At least on our side, we allow partners to actively communicate their expectations and their needs, i.e. how was the date? If moving forward, what are the things we can do or cannot do? What are the things you consent to do? At least on our side, we're able to allow these people to actively communicate what they expect from each step. Absent the escalator, oftentimes it's a free-for-all, and so probably even if you have conversations, the likelihood of assessments aren't that comprehensive because again, there is no escalator that you follow. But yeah. But second mechanism then,
Through this step, you're able to defend your standard and what are things you're comfortable with, especially in Generation Z, where a lot of people are already sexual. There are strong narratives that tell you to have sex, mess around with other people, go on Grindr, etc., etc. Even if these people are still woke and sensitive to some extent, oftentimes the majority are already predominantly sex positive and empowered. So, because of the fear of missing out, then you try to radically speed up your growth. You tolerate being touched on the first date because your other friends already experienced this already, and you don't want to be left out because you have no experience. So, because of the fear of being shunned by your other friends, because of the fear that you don't have the basic definition of a Gen Z being sexually positive, oftentimes you're more likely to tolerate a lot of red flags and allow other people to touch you, even if these are things that are comfortable with you, because you radically force yourself to believe that sex, like having sex, for example, and these other forms of intimacy are the prerequisite to calling yourself a part of Generation Z. If you want clearer boundaries and more standards and do not tolerate for the bare minimum, side with side opposition. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dilo, for that speech to crystallize the case from Gov falling on Dovwood. Here.
Hi, my partner of small thing. Verbal POIs, just raise it once. If you want to make this fun, turn on your camera. Since it's being recorded, it makes it more dynamic, you know? Yeah. If I have time, I'll take two. If I can't hear you, like if I don't respond, like do that or whatever, raise it in chat because it probably means I can't hear you. Great. All right. Be starting my speech in 3. Whoa. If I cough, I'm sick. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think opposition has a really confused view of what the relationship escalator looks like. It is not just about metrics. If anything, on either side, people can assess on when a date is good or bad based off whether or not it makes them happy. People can assess as to whether or not they can move on to the next step in the relationship based off how safe they feel. If anything, there are things such as bases in society that we can base it off of. The difference is, on our side, all the other narratives of society that show progression aren't as rigid as the relationship escalator. And this is something that we're willing to opt into insofar as we argue to you that the rigidity itself is what harms you, excludes you from society, but more importantly, places a mental burden on you to progress in a relationship to the extent that you expect to be married. The point at which you fail to meet these goalposts is the point at which you feel like a failure. You feel like you failed your parents. You feel like you didn't meet that metric of getting married or having kids in the first place, and this is where the mental turmoil exists. Note that this is precisely what makes life a living hell on opposition, because in the process of meeting new people, dating other people, and trying to get to progress through that relationship escalator, when you fail inevitably because you don't win on your first try, you yourself suffer immensely. There is no response coming from opposition, therefore you ought to credit this, at which it is far too late. Secondarily, the previous speaker is gravely misunderstands the first argument of Haduka. He explains to you that the loneliness epidemic is exacerbated when you are excluded by the rest of society and by the rest of Gen Z because of by the virtue of you abiding by the relationship escalator. And this is conceded to when the deputy themselves say that the trend is to deviate in the first place, notably meaning that you, as an individual, impose the relationship escalator on other people, which is the point at which you get excluded when people choose to deviate from it in the first place. The capacity for you to find a partner is severely limited on opposition because the people and the trend is to deviate away from it. So you impose it on other people. But secondarily, if you are able to find a partner and let's say you bamboozle them, the point at which you constantly impose this goalpost on them is when you make them feel trapped, which increases the propensity for your partner to leave you in the first place. So the exclusion happens in two ways. thirsty by your friends because you are abiding by the relationship escalator, therefore mean that they're more willing to exclude you because you're not aligning with the trend. And secondarily, you're likely to be excluded by the partner you're willing to date because they feel trapped in the relationship in the first place and by the metrics of society. Therefore mean that exclusion is far worse off on their side. I'm quite unsure as to why opting into a relationship is the only tipping point. We prove to you as to why your friends are more important than these people in the first place. I want to then deal with the only argument coming from Johan, which the deputy magnificently drops. They say that your family will hate you and therefore they will kick you out. And this is such a big harm, right? If I'm able to dunk on this and their only justification, then therefore their only justification falls. They say that your family will hate you if you deviate and will therefore kick you out of your house. And this harms you because you want to be safe, you have no house, economic reasons, right? One, they never explain why we would want to live up to the expectations of our parents. If anything, Haduka's framing, which tells you that we are individualistic individuals in nature, which means that we do not care if our parents hate us or not. We like to deviate from these things. We know that our parents will hate us. The analysis from Lorraine tells you that we are perfectly fine if our family hates us in the first place. Secondarily, we have a safety net in our found families who we find to be more valuable because these people care about us more than our parents, because these people don't impose their standards on us in the first place. So even if we have to take the big trade-off coming from opposition, we are perfectly fine and in fact better off than in opposition's world, because you are living a life of hell where you're constantly trying to live up to the expectations of your parents, which is not even true to yourself, which note that is severely harmful because as a Gen Z individual, you're individualistic in nature. You are not living for yourself, you are living for your family, and this is torture. Secondarily then, I'd like to question if our parents will actually hate us to the extent of kicking us out. I want to note that the deputy gloriously drops this, but let's be real. Your parents are unlikely to kick you out for several reasons. One, they probably understand your context because of the rest of the world looks like this. If the rest of the world is deviating from the relationship escalator, they're probably going to think, this is the natural trend. It's a new generation. It's fine if they do this in the first place. So there's some extent of empathy and understanding. Second, they probably understand your context. If it is for economic reasons, if it is for other reasons you cannot find a partner, if it is for reasons that you don't have a child or cannot afford it, obviously they're going to be empathetic to that extent. But third, even if they do hate you, I'm quite unsure why your fucking family will kick you out of your own house. They care about you. You are their child. It makes no sense at all, and it is quite absurd. That's why your family will voluntarily kick you out of the house if they know it will put you in harm's way in the first place, which means that their case operates on an extremely worst case that is very unproven. If anything, it falls in this debate. But even if it is true that we are going to be kicked out, why are we perfectly fine with this? Several reasons coming from Haduka. One, you get to live out a life that you chose for yourself in the first place. And because we are individualistic and we get to find meaning through these relationships, we're perfectly fine with it. At least we are happy. Second, we have the safety net coming from the real as in your found family. So it's not necessary for you to live under your parents in the first place. You are able to protect yourself to this extent. Third, and most importantly, if the trade-off that they're willing to take coming from Johan is to say that you're going to be kicked out, at least you're with the love of your life, then perfect. This is where we find meaning. And this is the most important thing to a Gen Z individual. They are willing to trade off the world to find that one person in the first place, which is why we romanticize things such as Bonnie and Clyde, which is why we romanticize things such as the end of the fucking world, because we want to find that person who makes us happy and gives meaning to our life in the first place. If the extent of trade-off coming from opposition is you are going to find the love of your life, but your family will hate you, then you're perfectly fine with this. Or are there any POIs? None. All right. The last minute of my speech will be dedicated to proving to you as to why your life is comparatively better than opposition's. So the extent of extension that we get from the DLO is to say that, you get to form relationships better because now you have a clear guideline for how to do it. I want to note, this is still quite rigid. I'm unsure as to why you can't form good relationships on our side either. The difference on our side is you do it by your metric. You do it by your own choice. You do it by what you think you deserve and how you think it should be done. If you want to start off with sex, then great. You are not restricted by the relationship escalator. If you want to start it off with marriage, then you can do so. There's no clear path on our side. So if anything, it is on our side where you expand choice in the first place. On opposition, I'm quite unclear as to why dating is the right path or is the most optimal path to find a partner. If anything, it is asserted. So to this extent, they don't even prove it. It is far too late for it to be built at whip. So you cannot credit it. On our side, what you have is the freedom of choice to explore. There's those two things for the debate. One, you get to decide your relationships by your own metric, which is only possible on government because you are not restricted. Secondarily, and more importantly, at the very least on our side, you can explore. You get to decide and adjust accordingly because it is by your own metric. This is where the individualistic interest of this actor is best catered to. So when it comes to relationships, it is only on government where we serve this best. We run this debate on three metrics. First, it is on your own personal happiness. Second is when you find people who are going to be like you and not going to exclude you. And third, even to the extent of family, they're not going to leave you. They're going to love you and accept you for who you are. For all of these reasons, propose.
All right. Thank you so much, GovWhip, for that speech. Just give me a few seconds. Okay, game. Calling on UpWhip to crystallize the case coming from Up. Here.
Okay. UI through voice. Oops. Okay. 3, 2. Government is context ignorant because they assume that all Gen Z individuals don't want to opt into conventional relationships. If anything, this just proves that the pressure to opt into unconventional relationships does exist, and it exists to a strong degree. This is why they think that all Gen Z would want these things in the future. The first issue I want to talk to you about is the escalator within the principal interest of Gen Z individuals? They say that it's not because it's patriarchal and religious, and you have to go against it because, like you do with so many other things. They don't prove this structurally, and they just appeal to intuition. Just because it's patriarchal doesn't mean it's immediately contradicting to what your interest is. Like some women actually wanting to be a housewife, for example. This is enough of a reason to say that just because it's a patriarchal concept or a religious concept doesn't mean that it's a real reason for why you should go against it as a Gen Z individual. Obviously, there's context to these things that they ignore. There's a tension to you as an individual. Maybe you hate the patriarchy, you hate the church, but you love your parents and followed the escalator. You love your friends who encourage you to follow the path that through, for example, the proximate relations that you have that probably mean more to you than smashing the patriarchy, for example. This matters more because going against the church and patriarchy as one Gen Z individual who is the actor of the motion doesn't assure that you get things like social change. But going against your family, people who are very close to you, assures that there is a harm to you. Their benefit is very speculative, but our harm is very real. The claim that Gen Z don't like their parents is just a huge assertion. But if you do, you still probably live under the roof. So the pragmatics still exist. They still control a large part of your life. For example, even if it's not kicking you out, it's still things like not being able to connect with you emotionally, which is probably important to you as a Gen Z individual. Did I get disconnected? Oh, sorry, we just lagged. So I thought I got disconnected. Okay, wait. Was everything clear? Cut off.
Yeah, everything was clear prior. I paused your time at 1:54.
Sorry, what was the time? I'm so sorry.
1:54. It's all good.
Okay. All right, just give me a second. Okay. 3, 2, 1. It's still not connecting to you emotionally, which is probably important for you as a Gen Z individual, because they already say that social connections are important to you. Feeling part of a group is something that's important to you. So what are the three things that we say? For one, you lose security because you could be young and these could still be things that are important to you. They can say that you'll just work, for example, you don't really need your family, but this is important because if you have to work your ass off because you have no other emotional or you have no other financial security or support system, then that means it immediately takes away from your ability to explore relationships. It's harder for you to want to explore relationships or go into all these other unconventional types or figure out what you really want because you have to work. So these are the things that you can't do at both things. So Johan's frame still works. You could probably opt into not going into a relationship at all because these aren't things that you can explore anymore because you're working, because you got kicked out of your house, for example. Or for two, you just lose an emotional safety net that's been very close to you and very important to you since childhood. But three, you are shunned by older people, etc. This is important because your opportunities as a Gen Z individual are probably dependent on these people. Your employer is probably somebody who's old who believes in these things. These are the things that are important to you because all your other opportunities and all the other people you can interact with can be people who believe in these things, people who do hold these things to a great degree. So your life as a Gen Z individual doesn't stop at you being Gen Z. You also grow up and you interact with other people who believe in these things, and it's probably harder for you to relate to them as well. The second thing we want to talk to you about is pressure. What they miss is that the escalator is a strong counter narrative. Johan already tells you peers are opting into situationships and FUBU relationships. So they can't say discernment happens only when you deviate because deviation is already the norm for the Gen Z individual. You are pressured into unconventional relationships because you have to opt into the only relationship form that you see from your friends, regardless of who you talk to, for example. This is important because it takes away your choice. People can still want a traditional relationship, and these are the most vulnerable individuals because they don't have a lot of people to turn to when they want to go to these things. Because you can't talk to a lot of other people who are your peers, people who are your friends. You can't even talk to your family because they say that they don't care if you get kicked out of your family. But two, this is crucially why Mezen is wrong. It's not easy to see whether or not a date makes you happy, whether or not you're ready to move on to the next step, because that pressure exists and they don't necessarily disprove this. Look at their frame. Gen Z will be excluded by your friends if you deviate. Guys, this is why you can't decide if you're really ready to opt into that relationship, to move into the next level, because you'll be excluded by your friends if you say something that they don't like, if you say something that they can't relate to. So these are the things that make you feel like you're always socially excluded. This is why you'll be pressured to opt into these things. And obviously that's bad. That's where things like abuse can happen, and that's the biggest harm in this debate. Before I move on, Kiwan.
So your deputy already concedes that the vast majority of society and Gen Z opts into deviating, which means that on average, our actor also opts into deviating. In order to believe opposition, you have to believe that they are conservative and they want to stick to the relationship escalator, to which extent they haven't proven.
Well, if you want to go to that frame and they're conservative, then that also probably means that they love their family, that they want to stay in their family. So the frame that we give you contradicts your thing as well. So what we talk to you about secondly is that relationships are better. But what we want to clarify under this first is how does the escalator and its deviation look like? They can't call us out for being soft in the frame when they say from their PM, well, you can opt into some parts of the escalator, you can opt out of just certain parts of the escalator. This is obviously a soft stance. You can't necessarily do that. What they want is full deviation, like you hear down the bench. They drop their first speaker in that regard. We'll even engage on their entire frame, coming from Yeshua, coming from me. So they should engage on Johan's as well. It's still realistic for us to say that you'd probably not opt into a relationship immediately. It says that when you go into a relationship, you have to follow the escalator, but it doesn't tell you that you have to opt into a relationship immediately. So you can still opt out of a relationship for a certain amount of time while you're still a Gen Z individual. We even tell you why this is likely to happen, because you would want to work first, because you're career oriented. These are the things that are likely. What do we tell you then on relationships? One, boundaries are set. The ladder is not flexible. You have to date me for a year or two before we can even cuddle, before you even think about sex. So crucially, there is no expectation for you to want to have sex early on, i.e. when you're unsure or unready. Abuse is more likely in the converse. This is terrible. You already hear this from Yeshua. But two, you think more about the other steps within a relationship. It's not just the ground rules for the sex, but it's also what a date is and what a date that you find thoughtful is, for example, and this is important, this is the most important, because relationships happen between two different people. They have different goals, like they already say. So you have to make these things very clear, because no conversations on these things can justify abuse, can justify calling you a prude for not wanting to put out, for example, on the first day. It's these same vulnerable people that they talk about. It's the women, the people who don't have alternatives for other conventional relationships. These are the people that we save from abuse. The second thing I talk to you about under this, it's just harder for you to justify your relationship to your parents, to everybody else around you, because you're in an unconventional relationship if you go to their side. So you don't even get to enjoy the relationship to its fullest extent, because you always have to defend why your boyfriend, for example, who isn't calling you for 3 days, who has been ghosting you because you're just a situationship, is still a boyfriend. Stuff like that. So the technicalities of the relationship get in the way. We say that from Johan. That's why it's harder to enjoy relationships on their side.
Good job, Aki.
Wait.
Right. Thank you so much. Upwhip to start the replies, calling on off reply. You're here.
Hello, am I both seen and heard?
Yes to both.
Okay. In 3, 2, 1. In a world full of Samanthas, people shouldn't be afraid to be a Charlotte and believe in idealistic love. Just because other people are already on Bumble, going to hookups, making out with people they meet in bars, does not mean that you have to force yourself to adapt to what your other friends are doing. So, if we cannot assume if you want marriage or not on both sides, at least we give you the option to assess better through a counter narrative against all other liberal narratives that tell you to be individualistic, tell you to be non-committal. Take it speaker by speaker. Prime Minister. The biggest claim of Prime Minister is on exploration. Why they get that? Obviously, you have to consider how the value of exploration cannot outweigh the reclamation we told you, but already a lot of values that tell you to explore. Your friends telling you to have car fun, shows like sex education, you are already in an echo chamber of exploration simply because of our Generation Z is what other people are doing. What this means is that the moment you want to go against and actually settle down, you allow yourself to reclaim that and what this order means for your side. It's round winning because it applies to a variety of spectrums. In the event that you are a minority and you probably want to settle down as compared to your other friends who do not want this, you're probably able to assess this choice better of wanting to like go into a date and then the next level of intimacy, even if other people don't necessarily have the time to assess these things. So even Aki was pretty clear. Oftentimes these are the most vulnerable in Gen Z. These are the people who probably still want to settle down, still want intimacy, still want to be committed. We don't leave them behind inside opposition. But the second speaker then, Deputy Prime Minister, they say that life is unpredictable. Exactly, that's true. That's why boundaries are so important. Because if you cannot predict what your partner will do to you, if you cannot predict what step you're already in, at least in our side, we give you the metric on how to predict that step and what are the things that you can expect in the future and what are the things that you have to assess right now. So in terms of unpredictability, it's our side necessarily caters to the vast majority of possible implications and allow you to be able to like assess that for yourself. But secondly, on cognitive dissonance, even if that's a harm, the bigger harm coming from Johan is losing your safety nets, your families that protect you, that fund your schooling. And oftentimes, this kind of safety nets are the things most proximate to you and most important to you because without it, you won't be able to pursue other forms of explorations that government necessarily wants. You won't have money, for example, to go Siargao if your parents doesn't give you money and you probably have no other means of employment. But even if they consider the harm of you getting kicked out and that's fine, we now question capacity. Will you actually be able to explore if you were kicked out and have to and you're like forced to work? If you didn't finish school, it's probably harder for you to get a high-paying job as well. So like, do you really have enough money to date other people like they want to do so? I think that's necessarily a case you have to consider. The third speaker then, government whip. They say is that even outside the escalator, even if outside these order, you can still assess what steps you are in a relationship. That's already a concession that the steps are still important because you still want to take things slow. So you can assess each and every single step that you are in a relationship. If I try a relationship with Aki, for example, I have to assess how was the date? How was the intimacy? How was the marriage? And if that is a concession that they do, it's already is like dangerous in the first place because you necessarily can't like admit to the fact that you have to take things slow. The clincher then is that even if it's slow in our side, we actively take the time for you to be able to understand your standards and think about what are the things you tolerate and flags become deal breakers. Absent the order, oftentimes everything is unpredictable and you necessarily are confused as to what's already in. Oftentimes it's lead to things like abuse, sexual harassment, and you tolerating a lot of red flags because you weren't able to assess that in the first stage of dating, in the second stage of intimacy. And so necessarily if you want better standards and for people, side with opposition. But secondly, on exclusion, the biggest thing they say is that other Gen Z people are already deviating, and so you will get excluded if you like necessarily don't deviate. Exactly, that's the problem. Their definition of inclusivity is fabricated because even if you necessarily don't want this kind of like policy or if you don't want this narrative of hooking up with other people, you are forced to do so because other people tell you that's probably something you should do as Gen Z. Chair, if you want authentic identity, side with opposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Op Reply. To end this debate, calling on Gov Reply. Here.
Hi, audible and visible.
Yes to both.
Cool. I don't know Charlotte and Samantha, but I do know what opposition is defending is Bimbi. Because the only people that they cater to are religious people who care about their parents. So I think we have to move out of Bimbi and into the real world where you are actually a Gen Z. That is where the debate happens. The first path to victory is self-fulfillment. Why does opposition lose this? Because their only path to fulfillment is under the assumption that your family loves you and you need to cater to your family. The problem with this is that this is unresponsive to the pivot that comes from government bench. You can find your families outside of your normal or usual family structure, which probably still allows you the capacity to insulate yourself from harms, but also for other people to be able to find love from you. Why do you think this is comparatively better under government bench? Because if it is a matter of choosing multiple paths of fulfillment and being able to have the choice in the first place of who gets to fulfill you, then it means that you get multiple more choices coming from government bench, whereas under opposition bench, you are stuck with one choice. You're one dad and one mom who is already 60 years old and is probably going to die. Therefore, we think that if you had a choice and you had more optionality, I think the multiple instances at which you can find multiple friends and perhaps still have some relationship with your family means that self-fulfillment, just on a mathematical level, is significantly more likely under government side. So how will we engage with this charitably? Because we think that Gen Z even saw the downfall of the relationship escalator when Gen Z have seen their parents very early on hate each other in the late years. That's why Americans have so much jokes about hating their wives, and why Gen Z has seen a family making a family doesn't necessarily guarantee happiness. We think for all of these reasons, the opposition clearly does not stand in their framing, and this weird up block of them saying that family is very important is very probabilistic and relies heavily on their frame. The second thing they posit under this is that it hinders you because you are locked into a situation of situationships and sex empowerment. So Lorraine already flipped this by saying that the pressure actually comes under government opposition side when you feel the need to be pressured to be married by 30. Therefore, we think that this is not primarily true under our side, but this is also symmetric under their side. But the inherent assumption under this argument is that Gen Zers are stupid. They all always think about skibidi toilet, but suddenly they can't know about consent. Suddenly they don't know what a good metric for date is. Like, this is so odd and absurd. Not every Gen Z is watching TikTok and just doing, oh, I know how to raise up this girl. That's not the case. So I want to shake this assumption and response up from opposition, because opposition's benefits and harms only rely on the worst case characterization of what happens under government, that Gen Z don't know what to do, that parents and everyone else is bad against them, and that the world is against them. Very weird analysis coming from opposition. Second path to victory. This is a pragmatically good life. Why does opposition lose this? They have a lack of demonstration. They tell us that this gives you more structure and safety, but show no tie back to why this is specific towards Gen Z. So sure, if opposition was in the 1980s, they might win, but obviously, given the 6 layers of characterization I gave at PM, this is not the case. But the second thing is just in terms of rigor of analysis. Look, their claim was security, but we never proved why security is important outside of intuition pumps. I think that intro alone from PM, we told you that people die just in search of authenticity. We don't think security is particularly important. But also note the tension of opposition case, because LO says to provide you security, you need a strong institution that you need to opt into. But BLO suddenly walks in and says, actually, it's a weak institution, so you can probably change it and deviate a little bit, so you have a little bit of freedom. Like, judge, choose one. Therefore, even if we were in the 1980s, I think that good analysis is timeless. You have to provide it towards government bench. So, why do you think this is debate winning? This is debate winning because we even give you a comparative about found families, which is far more certain because we tell you about 6 layers of characterization, why this person is individualistic and why these things are their priority, but opposition only gives you one, family good. And suddenly, they're Dominic Toretto with their case. Proud to propose.
All right. Thank you so much to both teams. Please cross the floor, shake hands. I will just go to the Discord with my panelists and we will